Let's try this again. Let's just have technical difficulties. I'm going to bet that half of these are going to wind up. Diddly-dum-dum. Right. Facebook updated themselves. Okay. So are we live? Go live now. Okay, so I must be live on Facebook. We'll just trust that this is working. Okay, Facebook has just decided. Ooh, I can switch to the previous version. Let's just do that. No, I have to tell them why. We'll just stick with this. Do you want to share? Oh, I have to push another button. All right. Okay, now I'm live on Facebook. Okay, so today for story time, I thought I would read a book called The Relatives Came, which I just realized is written by the same person who wrote The Van Gogh Cafe and The Islander, but it was written way before that. So remember this book and this book. I didn't make that connection. She also wrote this. Okay, so this book, The Relatives Came out in 1985, so it's a bit earlier than the others. I also thought it would be worth, so I don't have, the dust jacket is long ago lost, but this does have a dedication for Daniel, who's my sibling, who is one of the visiting relatives, love Anne. So Anne is Anne Morris, who is herself a children's book author, who lived across the hall from my grandmother. And so I have some of her books. I don't think I have any of them here. They're in a box somewhere. But anyway, if you want to look up great children's books, her name is Anne Morris, Morris, and many of them have photographs as illustrations, and a lot of them are cross-cultural, so like grandmas or things like that. The ones I liked were the ones about ballet. But anyway, so this is, Anne gave this to my sibling. So The Relatives Came. Sort of a bittersweet book to be reading right now. And it says, for Aunt Agnes and her brood, Dick Jackson and his, Jerry and ours. It was the summer of the year when the relatives came. They came up from Virginia. They left when their grapes were nearly purple enough to pick, but not quite. They had an old station wagon that smelled like a real car, and in it they put an ice chest full of soda pop, some boxes of crackers, some bologna sandwiches, and they came up, and up they came from Virginia. They left at 4 a.m. when it was still dark, before even the birds were awake. They drove all day long into the night, and while they traveled along, they looked at the strange houses and different mountains, and they thought about their almost purple grapes back home. They thought about Virginia, but they thought about us too, waiting for them. So they drank up all their pop and they ate up all their crackers and they traveled all those miles and finally they pulled into our yard. And then it was hugging time. Talk about hugging. Those relatives just passed us all around their car, pulling us against their wrinkled Virginia clothes, crying sometimes. They hugged us for hours. And then it was into the house and so much laughing and shining faces and hugging in the doorways. You'd have to go through at least 4 different hugs to get from the kitchen to the front room. Those relatives. And finally, after a big supper 2 or 3 times around until we all got a turn at the table, there was quiet talk, and we were all in 2s and 3s throughout the house. The relatives weren't particular about beds, which was good since there weren't any extras, so a few squeezed in with us and the rest slept on the floor, some with their arms thrown over the closest person, and some with an arm across one person and a leg across another. It was different going to sleep with all that new breathing in the house. The relatives stayed for weeks and weeks. They helped us tend the garden and they fixed any broken things that they could find. They ate up all of our strawberries and melons, then promised that we could eat up all of their grapes and peaches when we came to Virginia. But none of us thought about Virginia much. We were so busy hugging and eating and breathing together. Finally, after a long time, the relatives loaded up their ice chest and headed back to Virginia at 4 in the morning. We stood there in our pajamas and waved them off in the dark. We watched the relatives disappear down the road. We crawled back into our beds that felt too big and too quiet. We fell asleep. And the relatives drove on all day long into the night. And while they traveled along, they looked at the strange houses and the different mountains, and they thought about their dark purple grapes waiting at home in Virginia. But they thought about us too, missing them, and they missed us. Rolled into their silent, soft beds and dreamed about the next summer. And there are the grapes. The end. All right, that was our picture book for today. Now, yesterday, I started reading The Phantom Tollbooth, which I'm sure many of you have read. It's a very good, I'm reading the comments. I'm just not responding directly to them. It's a very good read aloud book, which is why I chose it. A long time can be quite reassuring. So, since that's the purpose of this whole silly thing, it seemed a good one to choose. All right, so for those who do not know this book, we are following a character called Milo, and who is headed to Dictionopolis and got trapped in the doldrums, where he picked up a dog called a watchdog. We don't know his name yet. And so We're going on an adventure. Welcome to Dictionopolis. You must excuse my gruff conduct, the watchdog said after they had been driving some time. But you see, it's traditional for watchdogs to be ferocious. Milo was so relieved, having escaped the doldrums, that he assured the dog that he bore him no ill will, and in fact he was grateful for the assistance. Splendid, shouted the watchdog. I'm very pleased. I'm sure we'll be great friends for the rest of the trip. You may call me Talk. That is a strange name for a dog who goes tick, 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 tick all day, said Milo. Why didn't they call you? Don't say it, gasped the dog, and Milo could see a tear well up in his eye. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, said Milo, not meaning to hurt his feelings. That's all right, said the dog, getting hold of himself. It's an old story and a sad one, but I can tell it to you now. When my brother was born, the first pup in the family, my parents were overjoyed and immediately named him Tick in expectation of the sound that they were sure he'd make. On first winding him, they discovered to their horror that instead of going tick, 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 he went talk, 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 talk. They rushed to the Hall of Records to change his name, but it was too late. It had already been officially inscribed, and nothing could be done. When I arrived, they were determined not to make the same mistake twice, and since it seemed logical that all the children would make the same sound, they named me Talk. Of course, you know the rest. My brother is Tick because he goes talk, 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 and I am Talk because I go tick, tick, tick. And both of us are forever burdened with the wrong names. My parents were so overwrought that they gave up having any more children and devoted their lives to doing good work amongst the poor and hungry. But how did you become a watchdog? Interjected Milo, hoping to change the subject as Talk was sobbing now quite loudly. That, he said, rubbing his paw, is also tradition. My family have always been watchdogs, from father to son, almost since time began. You see, he continued, beginning to feel better. Once there was no time at all, and people found it very inconvenient. They never knew whether they were eating lunch or dinner, and they were always missing trains. So it was invented to help them keep track of the day and get places when they should. When they began to count all the time that was available, what with 60 seconds in a minute, and 60 minutes in an hour, and 24 hours in a day, and 365 days in a year, it seemed as if there was much more than could ever be used. If there's so much of it, it couldn't be very valuable, was the general opinion, and soon it fell into disrepute. People wasted it and even gave it away. Then we were given the job of seeing that no one wasted time again, he said, sitting up proudly. It's hard work, but a noble calling. For, you see, and now he was standing on the seat, one foot on the windshield, shouting with his arms outstretched, it is our most valuable possession, more precious than diamonds. It marches on, and tide, wait for no man, and at that point, in this speech, the car hit a bump in the road, and the watchdog collapsed in a heap on the front seat, his alarm ringing furiously. Are you all right? Shouted Milo. Talk. Sorry to get carried away, but I think you get the point. As they drove along, Talk continued to explain the importance of time, quoting old philosophers and poets, and illustrating each point with gestures brought him perilously close to tumbling headlong from the speeding automobile. Before long, in the distance, they saw the towers and flags of Dictionopolis sparkling in the sunshine, and in a few moments they reached the Great Wall and stood at the gateway to the city. Roared the gateman, clearing his throat and snapping smartly to attention. This is Dictionopolis, the happy kingdom advantageously located in the foothills of confusion and caressed by gentle breezes from the sea of knowledge. Today, by royal proclamation, is market day. Have you come here to buy? Have you come to buy or sell? I beg your pardon, said Milo. Buy or sell, repeated the gateman impatiently. Which is it? You must have come here for some reason. Well, Milo began. Come on, if you don't have a reason, you must at least have an explanation, or certainly excuse, interrupted the gateman. Milo shook his head. You very serious, the gateman said, shaking his head also. You can't get in without a reason. He thought for a moment and then continued. Wait a minute, maybe I have an old one you can use. He took a battered suitcase from the gatehouse and began to rummage busily through it, mumbling to himself, no, this won't do, no, this is fine, he cried triumphantly, holding up a small medallion on a chain. He dusted it off, and engraved on one side were the words, "Why not?" There is the gate man. That's a good reason for almost anything. A bit used, perhaps, but still quite serviceable. And with that, he placed it on Milo's neck, pushed back the heavy iron gate, bowed low, and motioned them into the city. I wonder what the market will be like, thought Milo, as they drove through the gate. But before there was time for an answer, they had driven into an immense square crowded with long lions and stalls heaped with merchandise decorated in gay-colored bunting. Overhead, a large banner proclaimed, "Welcome to the Word Market." And then, from across the square, 5 very tall, thin gentlemen, regally dressed in silks and satins, plumed hats, and buckled shoes, rushed over to the car, stopped short, mopped 5 brows, caught 5 breaths, and unrolled 5 parchments. "Greetings, salutations, welcome, good afternoon, hello." Milo nodded his head as they went on reading from their scrolls. "By order of Azaz the Unabridged, King of Dictionopolis, Monarch of Letters, Emperor of Phrases, Sentences, Miscellaneous Figures of Speech, we offer you hospitality of our kingdom, country, nation, state, commonwealth, realm, empire, palatate, principality." "Do all those things mean the same thing?" gasped Milo. "Of course, certainly, precisely, exactly. Yes," they replied in order. There they all are. "Well then," said Milo, not understanding why each one said the same thing in just a slightly different way. "Wouldn't it be simpler to use just one? It would certainly make more sense." "Nonsense! Ridiculous! Fantastic! Absurd! Bosh!" they chorused again and continued. "We're not interested in making sense. It's not our job," scolded the first. "Besides," exclaimed the second, "one word is as good as another, so why not use them all?" "Then you don't have to choose which one is right," advised a third. "Besides," sighed the fourth, "if one is right, then 10 are 10 times right." "Obviously, you don't know who we are," sneered the fifth, and they presented themselves one by one as the Duke of Definition, the Minister of Meaning, the Earl of Essence, the Count of Connotation, the Undersecretary of Understanding. Milo acknowledged the introduction, and as Tot growled softly, the minister explained, "We are the king's advisors, or, in more formal terms, his cabinet." "Cabinet," recited the Duke, "a small private room or closet, case with drawers, etc., for keeping valuables or displaying curiosities. 2. Council room of 4 chief ministers of state. 3. A body of official advisors to the chief executive of a nation. You see," continued the minister, bowing thankfully to the Duke, "Dictionopolis is the place where all the words in the world come from. They're grown right here on our orchards." "I didn't know that words grew on trees," said Milo timidly. "Well, where did you think they grew?" shouted the Earl irritably. A small crowd had begun to gather and see the little boy who didn't know that letters grew on trees. "I didn't know they grew at all," admitted Milo even more timidly. Several people shook their heads sadly. "Well, money doesn't grow on trees, does it?" demanded the Count. "I've heard not," said Milo. "Then something must." "Why not words?" exclaimed the Undersecretary triumphantly. The crowd cheered at his display of logic and continued about its business. "To continue," continued the minister impatiently, "once a week, by royal proclamation, is the word market. It is held here in the great square, and people come from everywhere to buy the words they need or to trade in the words they haven't used. Our job," said the Count, "is to see that all the words sold are proper ones, for it wouldn't do to sell someone a word that had no meaning or didn't exist at all. For instance, if you bought a word like Gilbusk, where would you use it?" It would be difficult, thought Milo, but there were so many words that were difficulty, he hardly knew any of them. "But we never choose which ones to use," exclaimed the Earl as they walked towards the market stalls. "For as long as they mean what they mean to mean, we don't care if they make sense or nonsense." "Innocence or magnificence," added the Count. "Reticence or common sense," said the Undersecretary. "That seems simple enough," said Milo, trying to be polite. Easy as falling off a log, said the Earl, falling off a log with a loud thump. Must you be so clumsy? Shouted the Duke. All I said was, began the Earl, rubbing his head. We heard you, said the minister angrily, but you'll have to find an expression that's less dangerous. The Earl dusted himself off as the others snickered audibly. You see, cautioned the Count, you must pick your words very carefully. Why did my lighting suddenly go very dim? I don't know. Oh, well, you'll just have to deal with it. You see, cautioned the Count, you must pick your words very carefully and be sure to say just what you intend to say. And now we must leave to make preparations for the royal banquet. You'll be there, of course, said the minister. But before Milo had a chance to say anything, they were rushing off across the square as fast as they had come. Enjoy yourself in the market, shouted the undersecretary. Market, recited the Duke. An open space or covered building in which... And that was the last Milo heard as they disappeared into the crowd. I never knew words could be so confusing, Milo said to Talk as he bent down to scratch the dog's ears. Only when you use a little to say a lot. Only when you use a lot to say a little, answered Talk. Milo thought this was quite the wisest thing he had heard all day. Come, he shouted, let's see the market. It looks very exciting. Indeed it was. Chapter 4, Confusion in the Marketplace. Indeed it was, for as they approached, Milo could see crowds of people pushing and shouting their way among the stalls, buying and selling, trading and bargaining. Huge wooden-wheeled carts streamed into the market square from the orchards, and long caravans bound for the four corners of the kingdom made ready to leave. Sacks and boxes were piled high, waiting to be delivered to ships that sailed the sea of knowledge, and off to one side, a group of minstrels sang songs to the delight of those either too young or too old to engage in trade. But above all the noise and tumult of the crowd could be heard the merchants' voices loudly advertising their products. Get your fish picked if ands or buts. Hey, 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 nice ripe wares and wins. Juicy tempting words for sale. There's the market. So many words and so many people. They were from every place imaginable, and some places even beyond that. And they were all busy sorting, choosing, stuffing things into cases. As soon as one was filled, another was begun. There seemed to be no end of the bustle of an activity. Milo and Talk wandered up and down the aisles, looking at the wonderful assortment of words for sale. There were short ones and easy ones for everyday use, long and very important ones for special occasions, and even some marvelously fancy ones packed in individual gift boxes for use in royal decrees and pronouncements. Step right up, fancy best quality words right here, announced one man in a booming voice. Step right up. What can I get for you, little boy? How about a nice bag full of pronouns? Maybe you'd like our special assortment of names. Milo had never thought much about words before, but these looked so good he longed to have some. Look, Talk, he cried. Aren't they wonderful? They're fine if you have something to say, said Talk in a tired voice, for he was much more interested in finding a bone than in shopping for new words. Maybe if I buy some, I can learn how to use them, said Milo eagerly as he began to pick through the words in the stall. Finally, he chose 3, which looked particularly good to him. Quagmire, flabbergast, and upholstery. He had no idea what they meant, but they looked very grand and elegant. How much are these? He inquired. And when the man whispered the answer, he quickly put them back on the shelf and started to walk away. Why not take a few pounds of happies, advised the salesman. They're much more practical and very useful for happy birthday, happy new year, happy days, and happy-go-lucky. I'd like to very much, began Milo, or perhaps you'd be interested in a package of goods, always handy for good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and goodbye, he suggested. Milo did want to buy something, but the only money he had was the coin he needed to get back through the toll booth, and Talk, of course, had nothing but the time. No, thank you, replied Milo. We're just looking. And they continued on through the market. There's the vendor. As they turned through the last of the aisles of the aisle of stalls, Milo noticed a wagon that seemed different from the others. On its side was a small, neatly lettered sign. It said, "Do it yourself." And inside were 26 bins filled with all the letters of the alphabet from A to Z. "These are for people who like to make their own words," said the man in charge, informed him. "You can pick an assortment of any letters you like. Or buy a special box complete with all the letters, punctuation marks, and a book of instructions. Here, taste an A. They're very good." Milo nibbled carefully at the letter and discovered that it was sweet and delicious, the way you'd expect an A to taste. "I knew you'd like that," laughed the man, popping 2 G's and an R into his mouth and letting the juice drip down his chins. "A's are one of our most popular letters. Not all of them aren't that good," he confided in a low voice. "Take Z, for example, very dry and sawdusty. And the X, why, it tastes like a trunk full of stale air. That's why people hardly ever use them. But most of the others are quite tasty. Try some more." He gave Milo an I, which was icy and refreshing, and Talk a crisp, crunchy C. "Most people are too lazy to make their own words," he continued, "but it's much more fun." "Is it difficult? I'm not much good at making words," admitted Milo, spitting the pits from a P. "Perhaps I can be of some assistance," ASSISTANCE buzzed in an unfamiliar voice. And when Milo looked up, he saw an enormous bee, at least twice his size, sitting on top of the wagon. "I am the spelling bee," announced the spelling bee. "Do not be alarmed, ALARMED." Talk ducked under the wagon, and Milo, who was not overly fond of normal-sized bees, began to back away slowly. "I can spell anything, ANYTHING, he boasted, testing his wings. Try me. "Can you spell goodbye?" suggested Milo as he continued to back away. The bee gently lifted himself into the air and circled lazily over Milo's head. There's the spelling bee. "Perhaps, PERHAPS, you are under the misapprehension, MISAPPREHENSION, that I am dangerous," he said, turning a smart loop to the left. "Let me assure ASSURE that my intentions are peaceful, PEACEFUL." And with that, he settled back on top of the wagon and fanned himself with one wing. "Now," he panted, "think of the most difficult work that you can, and I'll spell it. Hurry up. He jumped up and down impatiently. He looks friendly enough, thought Milo, not sure about how friendly a friendly bumblebee should be, and he tried to think of a difficult word. "Spell vegetable," he suggested, for it was one that always troubled him in school. "That is the difficult one," said the bee, winking at the letterman. "Let me see how." He frowned and wiped his brow and paced slowly back and forth on top of the wagon. "How much time do I have?" "Just 10 seconds, cried Milo excitedly. "Count them off, Talk." "Oh dear," said the bee. The bee repeated, continuing to pace nervously. Then, just as the time ran out, he spelled as quickly as he could, VEGETABLE. "Correct," shouted the letterman, and everyone cheered. "Can you spell everything?" asked Milo admiringly. "Just about," replied the bee with a hint of pride in his voice. "You see, years ago, I was an ordinary bee, minding my own business, smelling flowers all day, and occasionally picking up part-time work in people's bonnets. Then one day I realized that I'd never amount to anything without an education, and being naturally adapted at spelling, I decided that—" "Balderdash!" shouted a booming voice, and from around the wagon stepped a large beetle-like insect dressed in a lavish coat, striped pants, checkered vest, and derby hat. "Let me repeat, Balderdash!" he shouted, again swinging his cane and clicking his heels in midair. "Come down. Don't be ill-mannered. Isn't somebody going to introduce me to this little boy?" "This," said the bee with a complete disdain, "is the humbug. A very dislikable fellow." "Nonsense! Everybody loves a humbug," shouted the humbug, "as I was saying to the king just the other day." "You've never met the king," accused the bee angrily. Then, turning to Milo, he said, "Don't believe a thing this old fraud says." "Bosh!" replied the humbug. "We're an old and noble family, honorable to the core. Insectus humbugium, if I may use the Latin. Why, we fought in the Crusades with Richard the Lionheart, crossed the Atlantic with Columbus, blazed trails with the pioneers, and today many members of the family hold prominent government positions throughout the world. History is full of humbugs. A very pretty speech. Speech, sneered the bee. Now why don't you go away? I was advising the lad on the importance of proper spelling. Bah, said the bug, putting his arm around Milo. As soon as you learn to spell one word, they ask you to spell another. You'll never catch up, so why bother? Take my advice, boy. Forget about it. As my great-great-great-grandfather George Washington Humbug used to say, you, sir, shouted the bee very excitedly, are an impostor. I am P-O-S-T-O-R, who can't even spell his own name. A slavish concern for the composition of the words is a sign of a bankrupt intellect, roared the humbug, waving his cane furiously. There's the humbug. Milo didn't have any idea what this meant, but it seemed to infuriate the spelling bee, who flew down and knocked off the humbug's hat with his wing. Be careful, shouted Milo as the bee swung his cane around and catching the bee on the foot and knocking over a box of W. My foot, shouted the bee. My hat, shouted the bug, and the fight was on. Spelling bee buzzed dangerously in and out of range of the humbug's wildly swinging cane as they menaced and threatened each other, and the crowd stepped back out of danger. There must be some other way to, began Milo, and then he yelled, watch out, but it was too late. The tremendous crash as the humbug in his great fury tripped into one of the stalls, knocking it into another, until every stall in the marketplace had been upset and the words lay scrambled in great confusion all over the square. The bee, who had tangled himself in some bunting, toppled to the ground, knocking Milo on top of him, and lay there shouting, help, help, there's a little boy on me. The bug sprawled untidily on a mound of squashed letters, and Talk, his alarm ringing persistently, was buried under a pile of words. I think that is where we will leave it, and we'll pick up with Short Shrift, Chapter 5, tomorrow. Have a lovely afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Bye.